Hi, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this chat because I think there's a lot of things that I can learn from you, which I'm really excited about.
Wicked, wicked. Let's do it.
So, the first question that I ask absolutely every single guest that's on this podcast is how do you refer to your disability? Because it's completely individual to the person.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that I'm pretty open about it now.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I'd say. And I just, if somebody asks me like, oh, what conditions you have or whatever, I just say, yeah, I've got cerebral palsy. I was born with it, and yeah, it's just something I've had to have and that I have to deal with. I mean, in that in that context, I'd say I never use the term like uh I like suffer with cerebral palsy because like I noticed that's a term that's like used quite often.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of that because um while cerebral palsy is different for everyone, and obviously like some people have it way harder than others.
Yeah.
Like I don't believe I suffer with cerebral palsy. I believe it's something that I have, and it's something that comes with challenges, but it's something that I've had to like kind of adapt to really. So that's what I'd say about how I kind of treat my disability. If you like, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Because I think you're very right in what you're saying is that a lot of people tend to think that disability sometimes comes along with suffering, and it really, like, don't get me wrong, there are people out there who do struggle and they do have hardships, but I would also never say that I suffer or that I struggle with disability, because that's not my experience of it, and that's not to like disregard that there is the experience of that, but for me personally it doesn't match up. And
Yeah,
so I think
exactly.
yeah, and I think it's so important that you say that, because it's not something that you like quote unquote suffer with, because it's not a suffering as such.
Yeah, yeah.
So with that, what was it like for you growing up and going to school with cerebral palsy? Was it difficult? Did you face any barriers to entry? What was it like for you?
Um, I think it was weird for me because um, like normally primary school is like great and secondary school is like rubbish, like the for most people. But for me, it was actually the opposite way around. As in like um, so my primary school was a great school. Like my teachers were great. Like everyone was fantastic. But I actually got bullied in primary school
Mhm.
quite badly, and it's funny because the majority of the people that bullied me were actually girls, um, and it affected my kind of my confidence with girls for years.
Yeah.
And But then when I got to secondary school, because I went to an all boys school when I
Yeah.
went to secondary, um, and apart from the sixth form, which was mixed,
Yeah.
and in terms of secondary, like I made a really good group of friends, um, and we're still mates now. Like we're all
Yeah.
really close. Um, so secondary school was a much better experience for me. Even though I'd say that in terms of the actual schools themselves, my primary was better than my secondary. Like in terms of the schooling experience,
Yeah.
my secondary wasn't great. Um, but in barriers to entry, I didn't really face any of that. I'd say that in secondary school they weren't the best at like including me and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, so like they wouldn't let me. I remember in sixth form there was a park literally like 100 meters outside the school
Yeah.
where like everyone could go for lunch and like all my mates would go and stuff, and they literally wouldn't let me go because of like health and safety reasons. And then I it got to the point where like I told them, look, I'll push myself, because they were like, oh, you can't go with a member of staff because of health and safety.
Uh-huh.
So I said to them, look, I will push myself there.
Yeah.
Like, and they were like, no, health and safety. And then my parents said to them, look, we'll sign a waiver that if anything happens, it's our responsibility. And they were like, no. And then at that point, I said to them, like, what you're doing is wrong, because you can't apply health and safety rules more strictly to me because I'm disabled. Because their whole thing was, what if you fall over? What if you do this? What? And I was like, well, that can happen to anyone. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
not just me.
That honestly, I don't understand how people think that applying health and safety to disabled people is acceptable, because there's no other like group of people in society that would
Mm.
ever experience that, like, oh no, you can't do that because of health and safety.
Yeah, I know. It's it's a bit mad. It's a bit mad, really. Like, even when it came to stuff like PE, they wouldn't really let me, like, because I remember when we got into sixth form, and even before that, like the boys, they do like bench press and go to the gym, and
Yeah.
and they wouldn't let me participate in any of that. Um, so yeah, my secondary school was really rubbish at, like,
Yeah.
sort of being inclusive,
Hmm.
but in terms of the group of friends that I made, like, um I couldn't really ask for better mates. So
Yeah.
and if I had to do it all over again, I would.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't really change anything. But yeah, the experience, like, it wasn't the greatest, but what I got out of it, it was worth it. So
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting one, especially when it comes down to schooling and disability, because schools don't necessarily know how to handle disabled children if they haven't had to handle, or like, handle is the wrong word, but they don't know how to approach and deal with the differences that come with disabled children. And especially because every disability is so individual and unique, for a teacher who's never come across a child with a disability before, it is going to be such a massive, for want of a better word, it's going to be a massive head fuck for them, because they're not going to understand what to do. And
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I can understand that from like a teacher's point of view, but then also on the other hand, as a disabled, like, person, I've been a disabled child, the best advice that I can give is just let us do what we can do. And like, if it goes wrong, let us fall flat on our face, because at
Yeah,
some point you
exactly.
need to learn, right?
100%. I think if you restrict someone, like, you're never gonna find out, like, what they're capable of.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's best to, like, work with them and be like, okay, we know you're in this situation, but let's figure out what you can do. And a lot of the time, like, that's through trial and error. Like, you're not gonna know what somebody can do straight away. That's with anyone when they try anything new, let alone somebody with a disability. So
Yeah.
um it's you got to learn to kind of um allow people to kind of figure out what they're capable of, so then you
Yeah.
can learn to work with them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about making it more of a partnership and not like a dictatorship, is the best way to explain
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Because
yeah.
at the end of the day, like, you want to work with people who want to help you grow and help you discover what you can and can't do, especially when you're younger, because you do need guidance when you're younger. I mean, everybody needs guidance. That's why we have parents. That's why we go to school. But it's when that guidance, or the people who are meant to be providing you that guidance, automatically shut the doors and won't even let you go out and experience or want to help you with your guidance, that's when it becomes a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to this, like, when I got into the second, because my secondary school was a Catholic school,
Uh-huh.
and um like, my family aren't religious, but the school had, like, a really good reputation. So, like,
Yeah.
my mum and sister fought to get me in that school, because at first I was, like, rejected because we weren't Catholic.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then when I did eventually get in, I remember the head of learning support at the time, who was an absolute, oh, I hated her, couldn't stand her. She said to my mom, like, oh, he can't do French, he can't do art, he can't do this subject, he can't do that subject. And my mom turned around and was like, hang on, like, you barely even know my child and you're like judging him based on
Yeah.
what? Like, you're judging his intelligence based on his disability, which is wrong. Like, just
Yeah.
you can't be doing that. Like, just looking back, some of the stuff that they did and the way they treated me was quite poor at times.
Mhm.
But like, as I said, like the friends that I made, and even some of the learning support assistants that were at the school were like fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
some of them I've actually remained in contact with, and I'm actually friends with them. The learning support
Yeah.
staff. So yeah, like, there were aspects of secondary school which were absolutely brilliant, and that's why, despite everything else that happened, I wouldn't really change it, because
Yeah.
what I gained from it was like so worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. And with all of that, when you left school, how did your disability, if it did or if it didn't, how has that gone on to impact your career and what you do now in terms of like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and all of that good stuff that you do? How has it all been impacted by that?
I think that because I mean, it's people are always a bit like shocked when I say this, but when I was younger, like, uh I was quite lazy, like, when it came to exercise, but
Yeah.
that was because, like, I wasn't really I would always try and run away from my disability. I didn't really like myself.
Hmm.
I wasn't happy, like, with my situation. Um
Yeah.
and I'd always try and distance myself from my disability, but that was more because of the way I felt that society would look at me. So
Uh-huh.
I kind of like internalized those views, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, and especially when it came to me being like a teenager and like hormones going through you and like girls coming into the picture and all that stuff, like I went through like a phase in like my early to mid teenage years, where like I was quite depressed and stuff.
Hmm.
Um and I think the thing that turned that around was actually again during secondary school, um where towards the latter end, my mates invited me to play football with them. Um
Hmm.
and they were like, "Oh, do you want to come up?" Because when I was younger, I used to play like on my knees as a goalie. So
Okay.
when I told them, they were like, "Oh, do you want to come play with us?" And I was like, "Yeah." And when I first started, I was rubbish. Like, I was letting goals in left, right, and center, like, and all this. But every time I made a mistake, like, my mates were there to pick me up.
Yeah.
And they would always say like, "No, on to the next one," or like, "You can improve," or whatever. And then eventually, like, it kind of turned into a drive to kind of really improve. Um,
Yeah.
and and eventually I ended up improving so much. And I think like that's the point, where I realized, oh, if I work for something, I can get results.
Hmm. Yeah. I love
Um,
that.
and like once I realized that, that's like been my attitude to everything really. So like I always credit my mates for this, because if they hadn't invited me to football and kind of hadn't encouraged me when I needed it, um, especially during those early stages, like, and one of my mates who has an older brother who played in goal, he'd always be there like kind of doing specific drills with me or like giving me advice and
Yeah.
stuff like every time I made a mistake. Um, so without that, I think I wouldn't have had this attitude change. So
Yeah.
massive credit goes to my mates for like inviting me down and being patient with me and stuff. And then that's kind of what was the start of me kind of, because after my first year at university, I decided to go to, so my parents are from Iran.
Uh-huh.
And after my first year at university, I decided to take a gap year and go to Iran for a year,
Oh, wow.
um, and do a year of like intensive physio um,
Okay.
and rehab. Because I had a surgery there when I was younger. Um, and I remember way back then, like working with a physiotherapist when I was a child.
Yeah.
Um, and while I remember it being painful, I remembered it being painful, which is the reason why I kind of wanted to get out of it when I
Yeah,
was
of
younger.
course.
I said to my parents, like, let me go to Iran, speak to this to the same physio and see if I can, if he thinks there's any chance I can kind of improve my condition.
Yeah.
And I went and spoke to him um, the during Christmas, during my first year of uni, and I said,
Yeah.
like, look, do you think there's a chance that I can improve like even 1%? And he was like, you can, but your age is going to be really, really hard.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to really, really work hard. And I was like, cool. Like that's all I needed to hear. So then
Yeah.
after I finished my first year, I said to my parents, like, I have to do this now. Like it's my decision.
Yeah.
Because when I was younger, like it was kind of like my mom and my dad would make all the decisions when I was younger.
Yeah.
But then this time I was like, it's my decision. This is what I want to do. Um, and they were like, yeah, okay. So I spent a year out there, um, and after that year, I dramatically like improved my condition. So when it comes to CP, I don't know if you know, but there's this thing called the GMFCS scale,
Uh-huh.
um, which basically classifies you on like your functions, like what you can do basically.
Uh-huh.
There are 5 levels, um, with 5 being the most severe and 1 being the least severe. And when I was originally diagnosed, I was diagnosed as a level 4 on that
Okay.
scale. I'm now a level 3. Um,
Wow.
so I managed to basically decrease my severity level on that scale um, by 1. Um, and
That's a
it
lot.
it kind of got to the point where like um, I used to be like 95% reliant on my chair,
Yeah.
and now I can get around with a frame. I can walk around on crutches now, indoors.
Yeah.
Um, I went from playing on my knees, playing football on my knees, to playing on crutches in goal.
Yeah.
So like I dramatically improved my condition during
Um,
that year.
was that through like intensive physio? Like, how did that come about? Because I'm so intrigued that you went like that you made the decision to go to Iran and you were like, no, I'm gonna do this for myself because I want to work at this. So what was the process? Did you have any operations or was it just purely like physiotherapy for your legs and your muscles?
No, it was a combination of 3 things. It was physiotherapy, like very intense physiotherapy,
Yeah.
and it was very, very, very painful. So it was intense physiotherapy, it was hydrotherapy, and it was a treatment called low-level laser therapy
Oh, right.
as well. So it was a combination of the 3. Um, and yeah, it was a tough year. It was very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of days I'd be on the phone to my mates, like crying because I was in pain, like
Yeah.
and again, like credit to my mates because they were always there for me, like even when I was abroad in another country. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was a really really tough year. But throughout that whole year, I just knew that, look, I wanted to improve, and I kept that in my head, um, even when it got hard. I mean,
Yeah.
at one point it even got to the point where my dad, who's like quite like he's not one to wrap me in cotton wool, so to speak.
Yeah.
But even he was like, "Oh, do you want me to stop because I was in that much pain?" And even though I was in pain, like I replied to him and I was like, "No," like, and I was crying at the same time,
Yeah.
but I was like, "No, no, like let me push through, let me push through."
Yeah, because you
Um,
had that goal, your end goal in mind, and you didn't want to like not get to that end goal.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was really really hard, but it was definitely worth it. And then when I got back from Iran, that's really um, kind of and then after university and stuff, in like 2019. So I think during my second or third year, I can't even remember now because of COVID and all that. Um, I started going to the gym full time, getting into fitness.
Yeah.
Um, and again, like funnily enough, I always say this to people, and they always get a laugh out of it. But one of my motivations for like starting the gym was actually to make myself more attractive to girls. Um, so I started the gym like full time, as in like 3 times a week in like 2019.
Yeah.
And that's when I started my fitness page as well. Because I always told myself that if I start a page, I want people to be there like right from the start, or if they
Yeah.
join later on, I want them to see like how I was at the start.
Yeah. To see the progress that you've made.
Yeah, yeah. And then in 2021, uh, so May last year, I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and
Uh-huh.
now I weight train and I do Jiu-Jitsu, and that's basically how I got to where I am now.
Yeah. And it's amazing that you've been so headstrong in the decisions that you've made. Because as you said, like you made the decision to go to Iran, nobody else did. You took that upon yourself. You made the decision to go to the gym. You made the decision to start like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And it's all been because you've had like an end goal in mind. And I think that's so admirable, is that you've never backed down from a goal that you've had. And I think that's a really like important key to take away, is that actually like, and this might not be applicable to all disabled people, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people that I do know who do have a disability, if they have an end goal in mind, they will go out of their way to make sure that they pursue it and
Yeah,
like and get that goal, because it's something that's so important to them, more so I would say than your average able-bodied person, purely because sometimes, and I know life is not about proving people wrong or proving people right, but there is that element that you do almost have something to like, you've got something to show the world that you can do it just as well.
yeah, yeah,
And through all of this, so obviously you didn't have the greatest school experience, but your secondary experience was a lot better than your primary school experience. And then you've been to uni and now you weight train. Through the hardship that you've had, have you learned a positive attribute about yourself?
I think um, I think 100%. One thing that I have learned is that when I start something, like, and I really enjoy something, like when I'm fully invested in something, and I enjoy something, and like I I have a goal, like I even even if at times I do feel a bit rubbish, because
Mhm.
in in BJJ, like there are days where I feel like shit because BJJ is a very like demanding sport, both
Yeah.
physically like and mentally. So and everyone goes through this like as a because I'm still a white belt, um, but I've got 2 stripes on my white, so I'm basically halfway through my white belt.
Uh-huh.
But as a white belt, and even in during like later belts, you go through phases where you feel like you're not improving at all, and like it can be really really taxing.
Yeah.
And one of my mates who I train with, who's like a really good friend of mine, um, she put it amazingly to me at one point. She said that like people say jujitsu is like really good for mental health, and it is, but
Yeah.
on the other hand, it can be really bad as well
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature of the sport, and like that's why she said that it's kind of important to talk about these things and be open to let people know that kind of they're not alone in this feeling because
Yeah.
but despite all of that I've never given up. I still, even when I feel rubbish, I still go, even like if I'm
Yeah.
feeling good, I'll go. I'll just show up to training no matter what because I've got massive ambitions in the sport. Um, and despite all the challenges like that come with it, like I love the sport, man.
Yeah.
So that kind of overcomes everything. And to bring it back to the original point, I think when I set my mind to something, or I've got a goal, or even if I enjoy doing something, I don't give up.
Yeah.
I'm very determined, and I think that's the best thing about me. Because I remember even during lockdown, like all my mates were um kind of calling me up and saying, "Oh, how do you stay motivated, man?" Like, because
Yeah.
without fail, I bought myself weights and I weight trained 3 times a week throughout the whole of lockdown.
Yeah.
Um, and it's because I told myself, one, I don't want to lose the progress that I'd made, like going to the gym and stuff, and two, I want to come out of the lockdown stronger than when I went into the lockdown.
Yeah, and I can completely understand that. It's
Um,
you want to benefit somewhat from this experience.
yeah, and then so I basically said to my mates like, look, I'm not motivated all the time. Like I'm gonna be real, I'm not motivated all the time, but you can't wait around for motivation.
Yeah.
And reason being, like motivate I always say that motivation comes through action. If you do something and you see results and you see like a small amount of progress, and I think it's key that we learn to kind of celebrate the small wins as well,
Yeah.
because people always think about like big goals and kind of big ambitions and stuff, which is good, but often when we don't break those down into smaller goals, like that's when you kind of get demotivated or whatever.
Yeah.
So like
Completely.
learn to kind of celebrate the small wins. But I said to them, look, motivation comes through action. Motivation isn't always going to be around, and it's not going to appear through thin air. But if you take action and do something, and you get a positive result, then that's what motivates you to carry on. And then there you go, like you've got your motivation, but you've created that
Yeah.
rather than waiting around for it. And I just said to them like it's got to the point where it's like a habit now for me.
Yeah.
I know it's good for me, so I just do it regardless because I want to get it done.
Yeah.
Because I know the kind of what it's going to lead to, so to speak.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think that's a really like important comment, is that, you know, motivation comes from the self rather than externally. Because if you're looking for motivation in the external, you're gonna find it, but it's going to be very, very fleeting. It's not going to be long
Exactly.
lasting. And I think it's also important to say that motivation isn't always there. Like, your habits and the results are what builds your motivation. So sometimes you might not feel motivated, but as you just said, you know that it's good for you. You know that you feel good at the end of it, and that's why you do it.
Yeah, 100%.
And with all of this, I always like to ask guests, is there a piece of advice that you would give either your younger self or a younger person with the same disability as yourself?
Um, I think the biggest piece of advice that I'd give, one, my younger self, and two, somebody like me, is just because so I'll bring this back to when I was a child, right?
Yeah.
One thing I would say, like when it comes to like physio and stuff, because when I was a child, I used to find physiotherapy like hella boring.
Yeah.
And also like the head physio or like consultant, every time I told her my goal, which was like I wanna be able to walk, I wanna be like independent, she'd always tell me,
Yeah.
oh, you're being too unrealistic. You need to change your goals. And that affected my motivation to exercise as a child.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because I was like, well, like what's the point, sort of thing. And even though people around me were like positive, I think that one like negative comment, like it really affected me.
Yeah, of
Um
course. And at such a young age as well, like it would be bound to affect you in some kind of way.
yeah, so my advice is actually to, I know you said to my younger self to, or to other people like me, but my advice is actually to two strands of people. What one is a physiotherapist, and the other one is like what you said. So my advice to physios would be that to basically um help the child find a purpose when it comes to their exercise.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, when I tell you what my advice is to my younger self, or younger people like me, you'll understand what I mean. But so my advice to my younger self or younger people like me is find something that you enjoy when it comes to like exercise
Yeah.
or physical activities, and just go after it and pursue it, um, and just give it your all. And if you don't like it, try something else. That's fine. But in conjunction with that, to go back to what I said about the physios, when I say help the child find a purpose, what I mean by that is if the child is into, I don't know, football,
Yeah.
let's say, and you're exercising with the child, um, don't just say, oh, like we're doing this to kind of improve your hamstring strength, for example. You need to say, we're doing this to improve this movement within football,
Yeah.
for example. Because
Yeah.
then if you say things like that, you're giving the child a purpose in conjunction with what they enjoy.
Yeah.
So then they're more likely to be receptive to doing the exercise. Do you
Yeah.
understand what I mean?
Yeah, because you're giving that external, like, again, it comes back to that motivation. You're making it, and I don't mean accessible in terms of like disability, you're making it accessible in terms of like brain power. You're
Yeah,
making
100%.
the
Yeah,
links for the child, and you're making the links, because I know that physiotherapy is important when you have CP. Like, it's really important. I've spoken to a couple of people who have it, and physio has always been something that they've spoken about. And I think you're so right. If you don't have that like motivation around it, or you don't have the understanding of how these movements can help you, like you said, you know, with football or even with like baking, if you don't necessarily understand that or have the knowledge, you don't necessarily want to do it, because as you said, like it can be painful.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's about creating that link and kind of one, the child, like, or the younger person, like finding a purpose,
Yeah.
and two, the people around them, like helping like create that purpose,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I think that kind of those are the biggest pieces of advice that I'd give. And talking about younger people like me, that's one of the biggest reasons I started my page, because I
Uh-huh.
said to myself, I wanna be that example that I didn't have growing up to
Yeah.
kids like me. And that's why it's so rewarding for me when I receive uh, messages from kids with CP, or parents of children who have CP, when they say like, "Oh, we love your page, we love what you're doing."
Yeah.
Um, I even had someone reach out to me recently, and they said, "Oh, like I'm thinking about starting my own like journey in like MMA and stuff."
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I ran across your page. Um, and that was really heartwarming for me, because um, I want to give back to the next generation. I want to make things easier for them.
Yeah.
I want to make the sport more inclusive as well. In terms of BJJ itself, and like that. That's why I'm like, I'm gonna be competing in my first competition on the 20th of August.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, but one of my biggest goals is, yeah, just to give back to the next generation, really.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
And I think that's like a really great way of looking at it, is that you're giving back, because ultimately I think that's what, like, that's like the main, like it's a main goal of, like, you know, the human race, is to always give back to the generation that comes up behind them. And I think that's a really like brilliant way of looking at it, is that you're not necessarily always doing it for yourself, you're doing it for other people, but like who are coming up after you. So I have this one particular question that really annoys me when people ask me about my disability, and it
okay.
tends to be, well, it's two. It's, did a shark bite your arm off? Or alternatively, what happened? Now, do you have a set, or find some questions that you find particularly annoying or intrusive when it comes to your disability that people can ask you?
I think for me is that, like, I don't have a problem with people asking any question, really.
Yeah.
I just think there's a certain way to ask, and obviously,
Yeah.
like, it depends on the people, because like, if it's your mates and they like, because I'm a pretty easygoing guy, so I don't get offended or anything anyway. Like, and I'm the first one to take the piss out of myself, really. But I think there's a way to ask.
Yeah.
And the best way I can kind of give an example for this is that, like, um when I've been to clubs, for example, and I hate going clubbing, by the way, because of the attention that I get. I just don't, and it's the only place where this kind of stuff like really happens.
Uh-huh.
Um, like when I go to bars or like anywhere else, it doesn't really happen. But for example, like when I go to clubs, I've been asked like straight off the bat, like, "Oh, does it work?" Or like, "Can you have sex?" Or
You're not the first person that I've spoken to that has said this.
uh,
A friend of mine, Dom, he was the second episode of this podcast, and he said the exact same thing, because he also has CP. And he says that when he was younger and he used to go out, people would always ask him, like, does it work? And he would be like, does what work? Like, what are you actually asking me here?
yeah, and then like, but the thing is, if somebody, like, if we were having a conversation and somebody asked me like, "Can you have sex?" I'd be like, "Yeah." Like, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have a problem answering it, but it's when they do it like straight off the bat, like
Yeah.
not just nothing, just out of the blue, just bang. It's like, what? You wouldn't go up to any other person
No,
and
exactly. And I
do
think
that.
that that's so wild that that happens.
I know.
Like, because at no other point in time would you ever go up to someone like, and it like, you should never do that anyway. Like, it's not an icebreaker for anybody. Nobody wants to be asked that
Yeah, I
question right off
know.
the bat. Like, it's not appropriate. But I don't understand, like, I find it mind-blowing that that's what people come up to people to ask, like that. Like, and is if that's your first thought in your head, like, oh, like, can they have sex?
Yeah, I
Excuse
know.
you.
I know. So yeah, like I don't really get offended by any question. I just think there's a certain way to ask. There's a certain way
Yeah.
to ask questions. But I think one thing that does really annoy me, and it's not really a question per se, but it's when like um, so I'll be in a supermarket, for example, or just somewhere, and a child will be with their parent or
Yeah.
whatever, and the child will ask like, "Mummy, Daddy, like, well, why is he like this, or why is he on a chair, or why does he use a chair?" And the parent will go, "Shh, like, let's not talk about
Yeah.
that." And I'm always there like, why? Like, let them ask. Like, there's
Yeah.
like, you dismissing it is only gonna influence their views that like disability is a bad thing. Like,
Yeah.
so
Completely.
like the last time that happened, I literally went up to the parent and the child, and I was like, "Hi, like, my name's Ali. I was born with CV, like, and that's why like I'm on a wheelchair."
I love that
And
so much.
like, and then the thing is, like, you could tell that and I said to the child like, "Oh, this is why I'm like this," or "Give me a high five," and then I made a connection with the child, and
Yeah.
they were like all happy, and it was fine. And then I said to the parent, I was like, "Look, don't hide away, like, when your child is curious, like,
Yeah.
don't do that." Um, and she was really taken aback, like, when I did this, because she wasn't expecting it, but she kind of understood like what I meant.
Yeah.
Um, and that, I think that's the beautiful thing about children, is that like they're genuinely curious.
Yes.
Um,
Very, very true. Very true. Children have a
so yeah,
curiosity that we lose as adults completely.
exactly. And but yeah, that I'd say that annoys me more than questions. The fact that people are like so sort of quick to brush it under under the rug,
Yeah.
and be like, "Shh, we don't talk about it," or like, "Don't be rude." But it's like they're not being rude though, like, because
Yeah.
you need to look at why they're coming out with what they are, and it's because like they're genuinely curious. There's nothing rude about that. Like, even one of the guys who I train with at BJJ, he's got a kid, and one of the first times I went to train, he was sitting on the sofa, like next to the mats, and
Yeah.
he just started talking to me, like saying, "Oh, like, how can you fight when you're like this?" And I said to him like, "Oh, like, watch me on the mats, watch me on the mats. Like, you'll see, I'm very strong. I've got strong arms." And then ever since then, like, every time he sees me, like, he gives me a high five, and he's like, "Yeah, like, how are you?" Sort of thing. Like, and his view on disability might be positively influenced
Yeah.
because of that interaction we had, and like, that's the best thing.
Yeah. And
Um,
you're very, very correct when you say that shying away from talking about disability, especially when it's a family or it's a situation where the child, and I'm talking about children in particular, the child has not necessarily experienced disability before. And I understand that disability is something, you know, for those who are not disabled to navigate can be quite difficult. And, you know, it's an unknown territory. However, shying away from it only makes the perception of disability worse. Whereas if you have that interaction, you have that conversation, and like you said about the young child training at your gym, like if you have that, their perception has been positively influenced by the interaction that you have with them.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
something that really needs to be taken into account, is rather than shying away from disability and having, you know, what might be deemed as slightly awkward conversations, that only actually benefits everybody. It doesn't benefit the child, it benefits the whole of society to have those conversations.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And so I've got one final question for you, Ali, and that is, can you say that you are disabled and proud?
Yes, 100%. It's taken me a while to get here.
Yeah.
But you know, I always tell people now that you know, I've been asked, if you had the chance to kind of not have your disability, or like kind of be normal in inverted commas,
Yeah.
would you? And I always tell people, well, like, no, I wouldn't, because like my disability, like, it's given me so much.
Yeah.
And I think even though it was hard for me growing up, like my disability is now, I feel like it's given me a purpose
Yeah.
to be there, to be an example to others, to like do all I can, like kind of in my own lane, which is in BJJ, to kind of like make the sport more inclusive and stuff like that. So I think I am very proud to be disabled, because it's given me so much. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed this chat, because I think it's very enlightening, and I think, you know, how you speak about disability as well is really great, because you're always thinking about the generation behind you, which I think is wonderful, like for anyone to have that thought, not just people who are disabled. And I really, really enjoyed this. So thank you for giving up your time and coming on today.
Yeah, no worries. It's always a pleasure to do these things for me, because like I really want to you know, make connections and like push my story out there, and because I'm hoping to get to the point where I can train like full time,
Yeah.
and do BJJ full time, and so I always try and take any opportunity to put myself out there. So no, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.